Alberta's Emergency Act. Powers of Ministry in Emergency. Article 19. On the making of the declaration and for the duration of the state of emergency, the minister may, not must, you see, may, do all acts and take all necessary proceedings, including the following: put into operation an emergency plan or program, authorize or require a local authority to put into effect an emergency plan or program for the municipality, acquire or utilize any real or personal property considered necessary to prevent, combat, or alleviate the effects of emergency or disaster, authorize or require any qualified person to render aid of a type the person is qualified to provide. Section E. Control or prohibit travel to or from any areas of Alberta. Emergencies Act in Ontario. Article 7. The purpose. The purpose of making orders under this section is to promote the public good by protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the people. So notice subject and the player here are the people, and they want to help the public in times of declared emergencies in a manner that is subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So just like the federal enactment here, there is a mention, or it is brought forth, that whatever provisions are being made under this enactment, under this statutory power, they are subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Emergency orders. In accordance with subsection 2 and subject to the limitations in subsection 3, which is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Lieutenant Governor in Council may, again, not must, but may, make orders in respect of the following. Number 2. Regulating or prohibiting travel or movement to, from, or within any specified area. 4. Establishing the facilities for the care, welfare, safety, and shelter of individuals. 8. Authorizing facilities, including electrical generating facilities, to operate as is necessary to respond to or alleviate the effects of the emergency. 9. Using any necessary goods, services, or resources within any part of Ontario, distributing and making available necessary goods, services, and resources, and establishing centers for their distributions. 11. Fixing prices for necessary goods, services, and resources, and prohibiting charging unconscionable prices in respect of necessary goods, services, and resources. 12. Authorizing, but not requiring, any person or any person of a class of persons to render service of a type that the person or a person of that class is reasonably qualified to provide. Did you catch that? Did you see the difference when we compare the Alberta statutory power, the Alberta enactment, what it declares therein, and what the Ontario enactment is declaring therein? How come one is creating an obligation and the other is presenting an option? Or did you not catch it? British Columbia Emergencies Enactment. Article 10. After declaration of a state of emergency is made under Section 9, and for the duration of the state of emergency, the minister may do all the acts and implement all procedures that the minister considered necessary to prevent, respond to, or alleviate the effects of an emergency or disaster, including any or all of the following. D. Acquire or use any land or personal property considered necessary to prevent, respond to, or alleviate the effects of an emergency or disaster. E. Authorize or require any person to render assistance of a type that the person is qualified to provide or that otherwise is or may be required to prevent, respond to the emergency. New Brunswick Statute of Emergency. Article 12. A state of emergency being declared in respect to the province or an area of the province, or a state of local emergency being declared in respect to a municipality or an area of a municipality, the minister may, there it is again, may. So we looked at 3 enactments, and It's always may. It's not a must. It's not creating an obligation. It's an option. It's a right that's being given to the ministers. B. To acquire or utilize or cause the acquisition or utilization of any personal property by confiscation or by any means considered necessary. D. To control or prohibit travel to or from any area or on any road, street, or highway. C. To authorize or require any person to render the aid that the person is competent to provide. J. To order the assistance with or without remuneration of persons needed to carry out the provisions mentioned in this section. So we're seeing a difference from one statute to another. In Alberta, statute says that the minister can authorize or require any qualified person to render aid of a type the person is qualified to provide. So right there, authorize or require places an obligation upon the person that must abide by it. In Ontario, we see that it says that they can authorize but not require any person to give that aid. So there's a difference. One is producing an obligation and one is not producing an obligation. We see the same thing in New Brunswick. They can authorize or require any person to render the aid. And in British Columbia also, through the statute, they can authorize or require the person to render assistance. Now, how come in Ontario we don't see the obligation? It says authorize but not requiring. Well, just before we saw in the Ontario statute that it says that these regulations that we're going to implement, they're subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that protection mechanism is coming out here in this article of law. Now, that's not to say that the rest of these articles of law are not stripping us of our fundamental rights and freedoms, but nevertheless, we see a protection mechanism in operation within the enactment itself due to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. When you look into the enactments and regulations, the statutory law that's being used against the society all across Canada on a provincial level, you'll find the same operations of law being expressed within these statutory powers. And these operations of laws are attempting to limit and abridge fundamental human rights and freedoms, natural rights and freedoms. So let us look at one of these operations of law that are attempting to limit and abridge our fundamental rights and freedoms. We see in the enactment in New Brunswick, and this is present in Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, all the provinces have this article of law, this operation of law, operating within. It says to acquire or utilize or cause the acquisition or utilization of any personal property by confiscation or by any means considered necessary. So what that article of law is declaring, it is saying that your personal property that you perceive that you own, through this enactment, they can claim the right to it and they can come and confiscate it from you, whether that be on your person, in your vehicle, or at your home where you live. When the legislator drew up these enactments and placed these operations of law into existence, they clearly knew that what they were attempting to do was to place a limitation and abridgment upon our natural rights as individuals. And this is not correct that they would do such a thing. And of course, because no one studies the laws or goes into the statutes, especially a statute of emergency, we're not really paying attention during the times of normalcy and peace. But now that we're in that situation, we're seeing exactly the operations of law and the deceitfulness that the legislators are using to try and damage, or if you will, hurt the people. No human being has the right to come to my place, come into my door, and take my property away from me, irregardless. So why would the government body that's considered a natural person under law be given that right, or attempt to acquire or take that right, especially during a time of emergency when people will need what few articles they do have to secure for themselves and their family? This just shows us and articulates clearly the intent and the thought patterns behind the people sitting on the tables who are legislating these bills. Now, myself, if I was there, I would have never agreed to such a thing, knowing that such an operation of law is fundamentally against the human being, fundamentally against their rights and freedoms. But of course, these cowards who sit behind the law in their suits on a table have nothing better to do than to try and strip us of our fundamental rights and freedoms. Under the Ontario enactment, you see that in Article 7.9, it says the government has the right for the using any necessary goods, services, or resources within any part of Ontario, distributing and making available necessary goods, services, and resources, and establishing centers for their distribution. So they're not clearly trying to say the operation of law as New Brunswick did, as Alberta does, and as British Columbia does, but nevertheless they are taking the right and giving themselves the right to do this. In Alberta, Article 19, we see the same operation of law. The minister can acquire or utilize any real or personal property considered necessary to prevent, combat, or alleviate the effects of an emergency or disaster. So they're describing it even a little bit more in detail. What is it? What's the reason why they can take your personal property? Well, they can take it to prevent, to combat, or to alleviate the effects of the emergency. British Columbia, same thing. We see the same operation of law going on. It says that they can acquire or use any land or personal property considered necessary to prevent, respond to, or alleviate the effects of an emergency or disaster. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to directly do this to individuals to come and possess your personal property, but nevertheless, the fact that the Attorney General signed off on this enactment, and it's his responsibility to read through the enactment to make sure that there are no articles of law that are limiting and abridging our fundamental rights and freedoms, our constitutional rights, our charter rights that are included in the Constitution of 1982. And nevertheless, he signs off on this enactment, and within the enactment, they're saying, hey, we can come and take your personal property. We can come to your abode, we can come to your dwelling place, and we can take your personal property under this enactment. Yes, but if you know how to defend yourself against this enactment, then no, they can't really. But what number or what percentage of Canadians understand how to defend themselves against an enactment that brings such an operation of law to their front door? I would say the percentage is very small. The next operation of law that we see within the enactment says that they can procure, which means go and get, acquire, take, and don't think maybe if they don't combine it with the previous operation of law where they can procure your personal property or take your personal property, but they can procure fixed prices for or ration food, clothing, fuel, equipment, medical supplies, or other essential supplies, and the use of any property, services, resources, or equipment within any part of British Columbia for the duration of the state of emergency. This exact operation of law is contained within all the emergencies enactment, and we'll just read Alberta's up there to show you exactly. They can procure or fix prices for food, clothing, fuel, equipment, medical supplies, or other essential supplies, and the use of any property, service, resources, or equipment within any part of Alberta for the duration of the state of emergency. So if it gets really bad, and on that level, in Ontario, they say that they can create distribution centers. So think about it. They're saying that we can acquire the food, set the prices, and then we can distribute it to you. Is it going to come down to that in Canada due to this virus? Or even if you believe that the virus is not really real and they're just doing all this to steal our rights and freedoms, is it going to come down to it? Are they going to push so much that they're going to claim that there's a food shortage and they're going to procure the supplies and fix the prices and distribute limited food to individuals? Who knows? Everything is up in the air right now. But nevertheless, they have the power, they have the operation of law behind them to accomplish and do these actions if they so choose. And one more operation of law that they're taking out of these enactments is that they're invoking the right to control or prohibit travel to or from any area within the province. Province of Ontario, Province of Alberta, Province of British Columbia. They're using the enactment to do this. So when you see the police stopping and checking individuals within municipal territories, they're using this and the Quarantine Act together to accomplish what they're trying to do. Here in this article of law, you see the legislators' true colors coming out because they know that they're limiting fundamental rights and freedoms contrary to what they're supposed to be doing. So they have to a provision within the enactment in order to protect the individual who understands what's going on. So in 5.1, we find the slight operation of law contained therein. It says, unless otherwise provided for in the order for a declaration of a state of emergency, where an order for a declaration of a state of emergency is made, and there is a conflict between this act, the Emergencies Act, or a regulation made under this act, meaning the powers or duties that the police or the ministers are operating under a regulation, and any other act or regulation other than the Alberta Bill of Rights or the Alberta Human Rights Act, or a regulation made under either of those acts during the time that this order is in effect, this act and the regulations made under this act shall prevail in Alberta, or that part of Alberta, in respect of which the order was made. So they're saying, if we produce an order under the Emergencies Act, then it's in full of force and effect, even if it contradicts other statutory instruments that are in operation in Alberta. However, if we create an article of law, or if we create a regulations under the Emergencies Act, and it's contrary to the Alberta Bill of Human Rights, or to the Human Rights Act of Alberta, then you don't have to listen to it. You have your justification, your exemption, your proviso. So the legislator included an operation of law, but then worded it so that it's double negative, and if you don't understand what you're looking for, it's going to make no sense to you. It seems by the actions that we're witnessing all across Canada that these enactments, these statutory powers, are being used to limit and abridge people's rights under the guise of an infection, an emergency. I was hoping that the government would use these operations of law for the betterment of the people, but it seems that's not their intention. Now, of course, they're offering money. They're saying to the people, we're going to take care of you, $2,000 a month, CERB, and we know about universal basic income. I think that those actions are just to lull you to sleep as they strip you of your fundamental rights and freedoms, and you will accept the actions of the government, because on one hand, they're smacking you and they're disciplining you and they're tightening the chain around you, and on the other hand, they're giving you a carrot, and they're saying, here, focus on the carrot. Don't focus on the chain I'm sticking around your neck that's attached to a ball that's attached to the floor. Just eat the carrot. Only time will tell how bad this is going to get. But if you're going to protect yourself, and if you're going to be able to defend yourself, you're going to have to know the operations of law, and you're going to have to understand exactly what Canada is, exactly what they've done to you as an individual. But of course, as I said before, the majority of individuals don't understand that. They know who Beyonce is, they know who the Montreal Canadiens are, they know the latest TV programs and the latest style of clothing to wear, but they have no idea about what type of system of regulation and control abides around them and controls them as they journey through this earth.